Sheer madness. They said it could not be done, and to attempt it would cause permanent brain damage, or worse. The climb that changed mountaineering forever also destroyed one of its greatest partnerships. In 1978, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler did the unthinkable. They climbed Mount Everest without the use of bottled oxygen, a feat once thought impossible that would actually destroy your brain if you even tried it.
There is another tale of an unknown pre-war American expedition whose members, now old men, are mindless cabbages in asylums for the insane.
Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler climbed Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, proving human endurance could surpass what even scientists believe was possible. But their monumental achievement came at a price, one that would drive the terrible twins of mountaineering apart for 2 decades. Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler were inseparable for 13 years, were already legends in the climbing world. They redefined speed climbing in the Alps, breaking records on the Matterhorn and the Eigerwan faces. Together, they pioneered what's called alpine climbing, fast and light, without extra equipment or technology. They had an unbreakable bond built on camaraderie, trust, and a shared ambition. And then in 1975, together, they climbed Gasherbrum 1 without the use of supplemental oxygen. Their philosophy was clear: too much equipment extinguishes the unknown. The world was wide open to them. Anything was possible. But Everest in 1978 was different. They both came wanting to be the first to climb Everest without oxygen, but it showed a difference between their personality types, and after their successful climb, it would crack the foundation of their friendship. It drove them apart for decades. Since Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay first climbed Mount Everest in 1953, there had been a lot of firsts. The first ski descent of Mount Everest, the first traverse of Mount Everest, the first woman to climb Mount Everest. But all of that had taken place with supplemental oxygen. Habeler and Messner were different. They did not want to be encumbered by the technology. Messner himself even said that trying it with oxygen was not unique. He wouldn't even try it unless it was without oxygen. Messner especially saw the use of bottled oxygen as a crutch, and he wasn't impressed at all with any of the previous attempts. He wanted to be different and change the way the world looked at mountaineering. So in 1978, they set off to Mount Everest on an Austrian expedition to climb the mountain by fair means, with only their guts, their willpower, and their resolve to defy the impossible. George Mallory himself, who disappeared on Mount Everest in 1924, argued against artificial aids originally, saying that a climber does best to rely on his natural abilities. Artificial aids risk sudden collapse if the apparatus fails. The philosophy endured, and by the 1970s, it found its champions. Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler, true partners in crime, called the Terrible Twins for all of their amazing accomplishments in the decade leading up to this brave climb.
I know that it's possible to climb Everest with oxygen, but nobody knows if it's possible to climb Everest without oxygen. I would never come here for trying Everest with oxygen. That's not important for me. That's not a challenge for me.
The climbing and medical communities called them lunatics. There had been a study in the early 1960s that was with Sir Edmund Hillary, and scientists called people absolutely crazy for trying to do it, said it is impossible to climb the mountain without the use of bottled oxygen. I want to jump in real quick and say thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. The holidays are upon us, and if you're looking for something really cool for someone you care very much about, Raycon everyday earbuds are the way to go. I personally love them, and so I know that the person I gift these to is going to be really happy. Here's why I know they're going to like them. First, although Raycon's quality equals some of the biggest names in premium audio, Raycon's start at just half the price of the other guys. So when you have a lot of people to shop for, that means you can get 2 for the price of 1. And second, there's no need to worry, because if the person that you gift these to is for some reason unhappy with them, Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee with easy returns. My favorite thing about the Raycon everyday earbuds is the active noise cancellation, so I can block out outside sound, and the 32-hour battery life. It seems like I'm always powering up my laptop, but not my Raycon earbuds. Also, I love the multi-point connectivity, so I can go to my phone from my laptop super easily if I want to listen to some music or take a call. And these are the most comfortable earbuds I've ever worn, and they don't fall out. And I also leave them right on the counter because I use them every single day. And check out this protective case cover. It complements the earbuds color perfectly, and they support wireless charging, so I can leave the protective cover on and get 90 minutes of battery life in 10 minutes of charging. To me, these are an everyday necessity when I'm editing my Everest mystery videos. As you know, I spend a lot of time working on my videos for you. And when I wear these earbuds, I keep the house quiet so it doesn't bother anybody else, including SIMBA, and I can keep on working and they stay comfortably fit in my ear. I barely know that I'm wearing them. Go to buyraycon.com/Everest to save big for the holidays and get up to 25% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 25% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/Everest. The link is in the description box below. Be sure to use it, because when you shop Raycon, you're directly helping this channel. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video. Back in the 1970s, Nepal only allowed 1 climbing team per route on the mountain. So in order for Messner and Habeler to get there to attempt the oxygenless ascent, they attached themselves to an Austrian expedition, of course, using oxygen. They arrived in base camp in March, soon established a route through the Khumbu icefall, and in April they were ready to start making their attempt on the summit. On April 23rd, near disaster struck. Habeler ate a tin of sardines and became violently ill just before he and Messner were going to go attempt the summit without oxygen. He was so sick that he literally bowed out of the expedition. Shortly after, Messner teamed up with 2 Sherpa. When they got to the South Col, trying for that oxygenless ascent, the 2 Sherpa, Mingma and Ong Dorje, and Messner were slammed by a major storm, absolutely terrifying winds and bitter cold temperatures, where they were battered down for a couple of days. Messner talks about feeling as though the tent was about to be lifted up. They decided that they would not, under any circumstance, attempt to use oxygen, even if it was for life-saving reasons, and they didn't. Finally, the storm cleared. They booked it down the mountain for an extended rest, where Habeler was still recovering from his food poisoning. At this time, Habeler was starting to show some doubt that he would be able to climb the mountain without oxygen.
Inside, I was always fighting. There were 2 powers sort of really pushing each other, you know. And I was almost ready and willing to use oxygen. Not to lose my brain, to be normal, to just go up and have a nice time. And I had a big discussion with Reinhold, and then we said, okay, let's give it a try.
Messner was truly a different breed, showed no compromise. In fact, when he came down from the storm from the South Col, he seemed energized. Look at this footage from the documentary filmed by the great filmmaker Leo Dickinson. He looks like it almost gave him a buzz of excitement, like, I just cheated death, and now let's go back up the mountain and try it again. Come on, Peter, what do you say? But Peter was starting to really show signs of doubt. If I go up there, and it's true what scientists say, am I going to become a lunatic too? Am I going to even recognize my wife and son when I get back down the mountain? This was truly uncharted territory. But if you were to roll the clock back in time a little bit, Messner himself took an airplane flight with the filmmaker Leo Dickinson and a pilot to 30,000 feet. The pilot and Dickinson wore oxygen masks, and Messner did not. He wanted to see what it was like to be at the altitude, actually even higher, of Mount Everest. And you can see in this footage, he looks like he's positively giddy about being up there. And Dickinson says in an account later that he couldn't stop Messner from talking. So it's obvious that Messner is absolutely convinced that there is nothing that is going to stop at least him from getting to the top of the mountain without bottled O's. Habeler takes some time to recover, and even during that time went around to some of the other Austrian teammates and said, hey, let's go together on oxygen. I'm not so sure about going up the mountain with him. I'm not saying that Habeler was chicken about it. I think he was just allowing some of those sensitivities to come in there. Messner had been divorced, and so maybe had less to lose, but Habeler wasn't really right out there willing to take those risks. And the other Austrians are like, no, man, we've only got so many oxygen bottles. There's no way that I'm going to give up my summit slot so you can have oxygen that would be used on my summit bid. And so Habeler came around full circle, and then he and Messner came back together, and they're like, look, it's us, no compromises, we can do this. And Habeler was back in, believing, okay, let's go, I'm not going to give this thing up. And as Messner said, climbing as high as possible without oxygen was more important than the summit itself. Truly a visionary. On May 8th, they stepped out of their camp just before dawn into the darkness, stepping into the legendary death zone where the oxygen is so thin in the air that it's 1/3 the amount that we experience at sea level. Every step was said to be agony. They leaned on their ice axes every 10 or 20 steps, gasping for air. It's said, by the way, that the oxygen, because of the air pressure, every breath that you take, you would only get 1/3 the amount of oxygen as you would at sea level. So all that work that they were doing was absolutely just tearing them apart. Habeler admittedly was still leaning on Messner for his relentless determination. And as Habeler said, I was simply spoken scared. He later confessed Messner was the more forceful personality forging ahead. He said, I was determined to know what a man feels like there, describing his near obsession with the summit, not using supplemental oxygen. Every step absolutely grueling, progress slowed in the thin air, and the weather was not good at all that day. And this isn't the kind of thing where you turn around and go back up a week later. It was now or never. At about 27,900 feet, they stopped briefly to rest, and they actually made tea to have a drink despite how cold it was. And Habeler later called it a turning point when they did that, though. He said, we didn't need words. They didn't even want to waste any energy speaking. It was as if we read each other's minds. We both knew that we had to go on. Truly, the terrible twins were a unit. They were working together. No words were necessary in a partnership that was soulful in nature with the same goal in mind. The cameraman that was working with Leo Dickinson remained back in the South Col. He was obviously not going to be able to keep up with them. They departed camp before he could even get out of the tent. Even using oxygen, Messner and Habeler traveled at such a high rate of speed. Believe it or not, when you fast forward to the news of them making it to the summit without bottled O's, the world was skeptical. They're like, most people with oxygen don't go nearly that fast. Is it possible you guys actually made it? They kept climbing higher and higher. Essentially, the summit ridge came into view from the south summit, at which time they took a 15-meter rope and coiled it around their waists. This was really the only time that they roped up. For the most part, this was two solo ascents of Mount Everest happening side by side. But when they got to the Hillary Step, Messner took the lead so he could look back down and film Habeler climbing up the Hillary Step. And Habeler mentioned later that he felt totally detached, as though he was watching himself. There was almost a hallucinogenic haze taking place during the climb, understandably so, that their body was screaming for oxygen. After the Hillary Step, every motion was painstaking, required complete and utter focus in order to make it to the summit without falling over either side of the corniced ridge that led to the summit. And Habeler described a surreal feeling as if he was outside of himself, observing his ghostly double doing the actual climbing. You can understand that their minds and their body was just screaming for oxygen, just hanging on for dear life. Habeler wrote during their time during that summit day, "We were then as close to each other as two people can be," and each described a spiritual type of bond that they could read each other's minds as plainly as if they were having a conversation. At 1:15 in the afternoon of May 8th, 1978, Messner and Habeler crawled together to the summit of Mount Everest. Peter Habeler explains how he wept openly, putting his arms around Messner, crying and crying from the joy and probably the relief of having succeeded at what they did. They certainly changed mountaineering forever. Nothing would ever be the same again. The descent was no less treacherous. After they departed from the summit and got down to the south summit, Peter Habeler decided that he would glissade, which is essentially you sit down and you slide with your feet forward. He went so quickly and at one time broke loose a slab of snow that the cameraman, Eric Jones, down in the South Col, feared that Habeler was going to be killed in this avalanche. But he maintained control and was down at the tents in 1 hour after having left the summit, which is ridiculous. You don't even do that when you have oxygen on. It took Messner about another 45 minutes or so, and during the time he was descending, he removed his goggles on a number of occasions and became almost completely snowblind, needed to be helped back into camp. While Habeler said he wept like a child, Messner described the moment later, writing, "I no longer belong to myself. I'm nothing more than a single, narrow, gasping lung." And they sat side by side on the summit, took pictures for about 15 minutes, and knew that time was of the essence to get back down the mountain. When news of their oxygenless ascent reached the world, many were skeptical that it had taken place. They said, "You guys went far too fast for people even using oxygen." And in an article written by Grayson Schaefer in Outside magazine, he was actually curious what other climbers who had climbed Mount Everest thought of their turnaround time, and wrote a letter not explaining who it was, but saying, "Hey, I heard a story of two climbers that summited Everest without oxygen, and they did it in a 10-hour round trip from the South Col to the summit and back." And Adrian Ballinger, who's climbed Everest and K2 without bottled oxygen, said, highly skeptical. There's no way that that possibly happened. But, well, they have footage from the summit, highly doubtful that there was oxygen stashed somewhere along the way. So they did it. I don't think there's any debate whether they did. They were two of the most finely honed athletes and mountaineers in the world, no doubt. And their desire to make it to the top in good style was beyond anything most human beings might ever experience. And then during this, the seeds of their rift began to grow. For many years, there were critics who accused them of secretly using oxygen, as I had stated earlier. And then the tensions deepened when Habeler published his book, The Lonely Victory, his account of the climb. Messner was furious over the ghost-written inaccuracies that he said about the climb. and accused Habeler of stealing the spotlight. He published it first. Messner, of course, wanted to be the first to the gun, having made his living by selling books and articles related to his climbs around the world. And let's be real here, the world of high-altitude mountaineering, for a person to succeed in that realm, you have to have a very stout ego, a drive, and a desire that a lot of times will push other people on the outskirts away from you. And it was no wonder, given all the spotlight of success that was shined down upon them and wherein they saw each other in separate lights at that time, that a rift was formed. Over the years, they got back together, they mended that rift. I guess over time that they're growing a little bit older, perhaps softened their inclination to feel resentment, and now are at least said to be very, very close. The terrible twins are back together now, and Habeler says that when they do get back together, they have a glass of wine. The 1978 climb didn't just redefine mountaineering, it redefined what humans believed was possible. It pushed two men to their physical and emotional limits, and it also pushed an amazing and tight friendship to its limits. But in the end, they found their way back to friendship and partnership. Truly an historic ascent. Nothing would ever be the same in the world of 8,000-meter peak mountaineering. Messner and Habeler, the climb, is one of the greatest climbs in the history of mountaineering and changed everything. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified the next time an awesome video comes out from Everest Mystery. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Do a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you.